Welcome back to Benny's Custom Works. Today we're back in the shop and we're on the IS200. Firstly, thanks to everyone who's been watching the Drag Week series. Plans have actually changed a little bit for the IS200. We had discussed about doing an engine conversion. We even actually have an engine ready to go in the car, but we've taken a little bit of a sidestep for now. We've actually picked up a Supercharger kit. Some awesome dudes in Bulgaria have actually sent it to us. A company called Prime Spot. So they do a bolt-on Supercharger kit for the 1G engine. And normally I wouldn't really sort of go down that route, but for that reason is why we're actually going to do it. I haven't done a Supercharger kit of any type before, so it'll be cool to put it on this engine and see what we can pick up. We're not actually going to fit this today though. What we're going to do today is a full service on the car to make sure it's mechanically as good as it possibly can be to cop the Supercharger. Once we get this running back with all the standard stuff back on it, we're going to take it to the drags before we put any Supercharger on it and get a mile an hour reading so we know roughly where we're at. Then once we've got all that data, we're going to bolt our Supercharger kit on and rerun the car at the track and see what sort of mile an hour we pick up. That's a really good indicator of how much more power it's making if you don't have access to a dyno. Unfortunately, we don't really have access to a dyno easily at this stage, so going to the drags is kind of the next best thing. It gives us good like indicators to be able to go back to back. There's no sort of discrepancies like you would find if you went to a racetrack. Like a straight 0 to 400 meter pass will give you really accurate numbers. So back to back mile an hours it'll give us a good demonstration of how much power we're picking up. These are all the service items we've got today. So we've got a water pump, a timing belt kit, which comes with seals and all sorts of good stuff. Some bolts even, it's pretty cool. Oil filter, spark plugs. We do have iridiums for it. We'll probably just gap these down a little bit before we actually put them in. A new fuel filter, because you can pretty much guarantee this thing probably hasn't been changed for 10 years. And we've also had an annoying dry belt squeak in this car since day one. So while we're in there, we're gonna whack some new dry belts on. And obviously we've got coolant and engine oil. So we'll chuck those in and get it happy. Should take a couple of hours. The time belt I don't think will be too hard. It's only a single cam engine, so it should be pretty simple time belt to do. I'm still debating whether we actually change the seals. I'm a little bit funny about changing cam and crank seals sometimes, especially in Subarus. A good rule of thumb with those guys is if they're not leaking, leave them alone. The Subaru genuine seals, for some reason, if you go changing them, sometimes they can leak after you change them, whereas if they're not leaking beforehand, I don't like to change them. But we'll pull it apart and have a look at it and make a bit of a decision once we're in there. But time to get ripping into it. We'll probably start with plugs first because it's nice and simple. We've got all of our old plugs out of the engine and they're pretty dirty. I mean, it could be a lot from just the car's been sitting around and it's only really doing in and outs of the shop. It's not burning the plugs off, but the old plugs are super carboned up. Obviously that's a new plug. They're both actually the same NGK plug, so good to know that we got the right plugs this time as opposed to me ordering the wrong oil filter. Other than that, we're just gonna gap these down. There's different theories on why you should and shouldn't gap iridium plugs. I am gonna gap them down just because we are going to go to a forced induction application a bit later. So we're only going to gap these down to a 0.8. Toyota and NGK both run these at a 1.1 gap in the naturally aspirated form. I think from memory it's something to do with emissions and stuff like that, but being that this is no longer a street car and it's also very rarely driven, emissions probably aren't quite as much of a concern for us as it would be if it was a daily driver as a street car. So we're just going to gap these down. As I mentioned, 0.8. Or 32 thou, so it's actually 0.81 if you want to get super technical, but I've got a few of these single feeler gauges. They're pretty handy for gapping plugs and some of them are good for valve adjustments as well, but if you do need to have a heap of different ones, I'd probably just recommend buying just the old school fan style feeler gauge set, because otherwise these aren't cheap. They're probably like 25, 30 bucks each, but super convenient if you only need 2 or 3 sizes. So I've got 3 of them. It does all the plug sizes we need. And we're going to gap these ones and chuck them back in. The last thing I'm going to do to these plugs before we fit them is number them. It's a good little tip to look at how each cylinder is operating, especially if you just pull them all out and then forget which one's which. So, I mean, generally we pull them out and lay them out as they've come out, but in the past I have also just pulled them out and then gone, oh, which one's which. So, just going to quick texter. It's nice and simple. It generally stays on the ceramic pretty well. But yeah, just 1 to 6, obviously front to back. Subarus are a bit different, but depending on what car you've got, you should probably know which cylinder's which number anyway, or at least work out a system that works for you. So yeah, just going to number them 1 to 6 and then throw them back in. Oh, awesome, brown water. That's like 10-year too old red coolant. Nothing like a good service history. We're having a bit of a drama trying to undo the crank bolt. The air conditioning condenser is actually in the way, but the aircon's never worked in this car anyway, so we're actually going to remove the aircon system while we're here. We're just undone the condenser. There's a bit of coolant and stuff on it from pulling the radiator out, obviously. But after we've got this out, we may as well just continue stripping the aircon out of it. So we'll probably pull out the compressor and all the stuff in the bay while we're here today. I'm obviously not going to bother pulling the bits out from under the dash, but this stuff will get out of the way and it doesn't need to be there anymore. And it'll also mean we can get a rattle gun in there and hopefully get on that crank bolt and break it loose. Some of you guys may be wondering why I've undone the crank bolt before I've taken any of the accessory belts off. The reason for that is if we couldn't actually undo the crank bolt, we'd just have to put all that stuff back on to put the car back together anyway. So I always like to start with the crank bolt because then it means you're not reworking stuff. We've luckily had that actually come undone, so that's pretty awesome. So we're going to continue along now and strip all the accessory belts off. Then we'll actually take the crank pulley off. Then we'll take our timing covers off and assess the belt. We'll time the engine, then rip it all off and put our new belt and idlers on it. We're definitely not going to actually change the cam seal. There's a note on the timing cover to say that you can't reuse the cam pulley bolt. I don't have a new one of those today, so we're not going to touch that. But apart from that, it's pretty much just going to be a standard cam belt service. We're also going to change the pulley, and I think there's a tensioner in there as well, but we'll have a look and chuck it together. So belts off, and then crank pulley, and also the water pump pulley, which I may have forgotten to mention, and then back to normal. So it's a genuine belt. Let's say it's probably never been replaced. You can see it's cracked pretty badly. There's shiny areas on the very top of the belt, which means that the pulley's actually contacting with the top edge of that groove, which it's not supposed to do on a multi-V belt. So they're well and truly past the use by date. We got some new Gates ones to go on there and should be happy days. This belt's even worse than the last one. This was the alternator and water pump belt. This IS200 engine actually runs 2 different water pump belts. So it's got this primary belt, which also does the alternator, but it also has a secondary belt, which runs from the crank to the water pump to the power steering pump. So interesting little setup, but obviously some sort of fail-safe mechanism wherein if you lose one of those belts and you keep driving, you've still got a water pump, it's actually a pretty good idea. But in saying that, you're either going to lose alternator or power steering, so you're going to know about it either way. So it's probably enough to get you home, but you wouldn't really want to lose an alternator if you've got a 100k drive. Shout out to Roadkill for no alternator. That was a fun time. And by fun, I mean horrible. And the trifecta. That's the worst one out of all of them. I can't imagine why any of these accessory belts would have been noisy. Crazy that they would definitely be the genuine Toyota ones. Which is pretty cool because this car's got like 280,000 Ks on it. But the stupid thing is, this probably had a timing belt 20,000 kilometers ago. So whoever's done the timing belt didn't think that it was necessary to do any of the accessory belts. Interestingly, the timing cover said that this engine had a belt 20,000 kilometers ago. Looking at this belt, I'm pretty confident that it hasn't. A dead giveaway is that it's actually a Gates belt and the sticker is a completely different brand. So I'd say they've had a timing belt sticker lying around and just chucked that sticker on saying that the belt had been done. I don't think it was a deliberate deception by the guy I bought it from because he hadn't had it very long. But yeah, it's something to be mindful of buying a used car. Don't necessarily believe everything that's on the car. This belt's really badly varnished and it definitely hasn't done the Ks that the sticker would lead you to believe. So handy little bit of information. Probably factor in replacing the timing belt on any car you buy these days at second hand. I mean, this thing's 20 years old, give or take. All the pulleys and stuff are also really noisy, so they've obviously not been changed either. So for that reason, I also recommend to do a whole kit, not just a belt. And that water pump also looks like it's never been changed either. So it's much simpler to do the whole job once rather than do bits and pieces. You may save a couple of $100 not replacing the pulleys and the water pump up front. And then 6 to 9 months time, something like that, the water pump then leaks or fails and then you've got to basically redo the whole job again. And then if the idlers or the tensioner fail, you're actually most likely going to damage your engine depending on what engine you've got. A lot of Subarus, if the tensioner fails, it bends all the valves. I believe this engine's a free spinning engine, so that'll mean if it drops a belt, it stops and then you're good to go. But I wouldn't want to take that risk because you haven't done the whole job properly. So a kit is actually not that much dearer than a belt these days either. So like the Gates kits come with everything you need, including the seals. The one thing I will note though on the IS200 or the 1GFE engine, the cam bolt you cannot reuse. So we're definitely not going to be touching cam or crank seals today. So if you do want to attempt changing the cam seal, I'd definitely recommend to get a brand new bolt from Toyota before you go touching anything. So it is noted pretty obviously on the timing cover, but I didn't actually read that until today when I went to do the job. So yeah, keep that in mind and make sure you get a new bolt before you go pulling it apart on the 1GFE. We're about to pull a pin out of the tensioner. It's the moment of truth. If this belt's not in the right spot, fair chance I've stuffed the tensioner, so fingers crossed, it's out. Still looks all right. Okay, it still works. Something that's worth mentioning, a lot of cars these days run a sun plug washer. Toyotas generally run like a fibrous, papery, cardboardy type washer. We just use copper washers on pretty much everything. The thing I find easiest is to actually just buy like a cheap copper washer assortment. They're way cheaper buying them that way than if you try and buy like a pack of 5 or a pack of 10 or whatever. And the other option is you get heaps of different sizes. Obviously it's an assortment, so you get stuff that'll do like your brake lines and all sorts of different sun plug washers and like turbo oil feeds and water feeds and stuff like that. So yeah, something to be mindful of is to change those washers all the time. If you don't change it, it can leak from the sun plug. I've seen people put thread sealant on the sun plugs before, but generally it's only going to leak if you can't seal it on the face through the thread. But yeah, I'd always recommend a washer over a sealant. I've seen all sorts of horror stories over the years with like grey, like RTV or thread sealant or Loctite, even like all sorts of stuff just been slapped on there to get you by. But yeah, the washer's always the go-to for me. So unfortunately we don't carry the genuine Toyota ones, but we very rarely use them. So the copper one's a good one that does all the cars we've got. That's got most of our major service done. The last thing we've got to do now is do the fuel filter. So we're going to jump in the back of the car and hopefully our fuel module will actually come out through the floor. I haven't done one in an IS200 before, so it's going to be interesting to see what's involved and how hard it is to do it. So I'm going to jump in the back, and luckily because we've already pulled the back seats out, it's going to make it a little bit easier, but you guys will be able to see what's involved for the most part if you're doing it in a street car, so there's very little difference anyway. So let's rip it apart. When you're doing your in-tank filters on any car really, it's important to relieve the pressure out of the tank. Different cars breathe in different ways with the fuel tank, so a nice simple way is actually just to take your fuel cap out, then it lets the tank breathe in and you just put it back in. Basically it's just to get the pressure out of the tank, so if you pull your pressure line off the tank, it doesn't then force fuel from the tank through the pump, because you can actually force fuel through the pump going this way because the one-way valve only acts as pressure going back that way. So if there's pressure in the tank and no pressure in the line, once you remove it, it will actually force fuel through the pump. So yeah, nice and easy to just drop it off there, because otherwise it'll just keep pumping fuel out of there until it runs out of pressure in the tank, and that could be a couple of litres of fuel before you actually get the pressure out, depending on how much pressure's in your fuel tank. Couple of handy tips doing your in-tank fuel pump. Always have like a bucket or a tray handy, so if you do have a car with a full interior, you can just basically lift it out, drip any fuel into the tank, and then you put the bucket underneath. It stops getting fuel through an interior of a car, whether it's yours, your mate's car, it's a customer car. It's super easy, and then you just lift the whole thing out. It's out of the road, no mess. And another thing, a lot of cars these days run what's known as like a saddle tank, which basically means there's a low point in either side of the tank for the drive shaft to go through. It's super common on rear-wheel drive or all-wheel drive cars. As a result of that, generally you need to get the fuel from one side of the tank to the other. Some manufacturers run the hose internally in the tank, which is the case with the IS200. This line here is the return side line, so a nice little way to stop this falling into the tank when you're doing your pump or your filter change. Just put some long nose pliers in the hose and just sit it on the edge. It actually stops the hose falling into the tank and you don't have to go fishing around for it. So the other problem with fuel tanks a lot of the time too, the edge on the tank, because it's a punched steel tank generally, it's super sharp. I've sliced my arm doing it before. Marty's also done it, and a couple other guys I know have done it as well, playing around with early Subaru stuff. So yeah, be super mindful if you do have to put your hand in the tank, that the ring that's been punched or the hole that's been punched into the top of the tank generally doesn't have a lot of preparation on it. They don't deburr or anything. It's literally as punched and then they just weld a collar to it. So yeah, be super careful. If you can, use like long gloves or gauntlets. Other than that, try and put a couple of rags around it. I mean, sometimes like this tank, the hole's actually quite small anyway, but yeah, something to be mindful of so that you're not slicing your arm to pieces when you're fishing around inside a fuel tank. We've got our new filter, which is also a pump housing. Super common on these late model sort of drop-in setups. these are always clipped together from what I've seen. I haven't really seen many or any of them bolted together. So I've got a fair selection of tools to try and release the clips. I've got a couple of thick feeler gauges. I've also got some picks and some small screwdrivers. So depending on the exact pump, sometimes you need a combination of a lot of them. So this one here's got 4 clipping points. So you need at least 3 things jammed in those clips before you release the final one. Otherwise you're just constantly fighting another clip. It's also got the base clipped on as well. So we'll probably unclip the bottom first to take the fuel pump out, and then we'll just unclip the guts of it. And then it shouldn't be too much of a task to actually swap that filter over. So it also has the jet pump in it, which basically allows, it's a siphon system that's operated off the fuel reg return. So the return forces fuel through an orifice that then creates a low pressure on that one, which then draws fuel from the other side of the tank. So you've always got fuel on the pump side of the tank, even if it's quite low on the driver's side of the tank. In this instance, it'll draw fuel across, so that you've always got basically a full pump side of the tank. So in cornering, it'll always be drawing fuel across to minimize fuel surge. I mean, it's not foolproof on an OEM car. Sometimes you need to put like a little surge box around it as well, but they work pretty well for what they are in an OEM application. Some of the real late model stuff too, they actually build another box around the fuel pickup that then kind of encapsulates it all, and you've got half a litre of fuel pretty much sitting around the fuel filter or the fuel pickup at all times. So they're definitely developing this method still, and it is current tech to still have this sort of plastic module in a fuel tank. So anything from kind of late 90s to current cars will run this kind of setup with the plastic housing filter. So in bay or under vehicle fuel filters are nowhere near as common in petrol cars as they used to be. Diesel cars still run a lot of that kind of external filters, or a couple of external filters, because you just need that extra level of filtration with a diesel. But on petrol stuff, this generally works pretty well in an OEM application. It can be sort of not supporting massive horsepower. So there's like kind of small passages and stuff in some of these that will limit the flows to maybe 300 kilowatts or something in a lot of late model cars. And then you can buy aftermarket twin pump hangers and all sorts of stuff. I know Radium makes some, and all these other aftermarket companies are making big drop-in units now. So there's definitely a lot of stuff out there for late model stuff. A lot of parts out there for late model stuff. Looking at this filter, it's probably actually able to be used in a lot of different cars. So this mount here, I mean, you've kind of got to know what you're looking at, but that bracket there is for a fuel sender. So it may also fit like a Corolla or a Yaris or like a GS300 or a Hilux. Like it could have fitted any other Toyota thing, or potentially even Daihatsu's or other manufacturers' vehicles as well. So, I mean, trying to use an already available part in your setup is going to make the production of your car cheaper. So, yeah, the more cars you can use the same part in, the better that manufacturing is going to be. And there's evidence of that today. You can pull apart cars and see, like Subaru, a lot of Subarus in the 90s and 2000s had Nissan mirror switches and electric window switches and stuff. So, parts bin rating is definitely a thing, and it's been a thing for a long time. So, yeah, cool to see manufacturers and the way they save money, and obviously that does pass on to the customer, so makes cooler cars for cheaper. Another little thing I like to do is just clean the top retaining plate and the top of the housing, so someone knows you've actually been in there. I mean, this is more of a workshop type thing, but it looks like you've actually done something rather than just do the minimum required. So give it a little spray and a quick wipe off. It's literally a minute out of your day. And then for that 1 in 200 customers that does go looking for stuff that you've done, it shows that you've actually taken the time to do a little bit extra and show them that you do care about their car as much as they do. Nailed it. Make sure that you're not trying to attack an in-tank filter with a full tank of fuel. This is pretty much full, and putting the fuel pump module back in, it can actually force some of the fuel out, because when this was in here before it was full of fuel, but putting it back in now it's empty, so it'll displace probably a full litre full of fuel. just completed the major service on our IS200. Now it's time to hit the drags. We're down here at Sydney Dragway. It's Wednesday afternoon, the weather's awesome. Got the old IS200 out here, so we've already scrutineered it. Let's go and jump in the lanes. Getting ready for our first pass. It's just on 6 o'clock now. So we're in lane 2, so we'll be about the second or third pair down the track. And hopefully it's not a completely embarrassing, terrible time, but we'll see how we go. This thing's not going to be fast. I'm going to take a stab at 16.2. Hopefully the sunroof doesn't blow out. It's a pretty cool little Datsun 1200 actually. 1200 sedan. Oh, I just double bulbed him. What a jerk. Quietly, and it's hot. Man is hot. Oh wow, I wasn't far off. 16.8 with a 360 foot. It's got the little Datsun 1200 sedan again. It's a coupe sedan. It's not the 1200 coupe body style you normally see. It's a pretty rare little thing. Actually, it might even be 1,000, I'm not sure. Not right up on Datsuns. I'm sure if we have an external of it, someone can tell me what it is in the comments. The launch, but shifted before the rev limit of every gear, so we'll go back around again. Why not? Looks like there's only about 30 cars in the lane so far, which is great for just going rounds and having a bit of fun. Hot lap in a car generally isn't great, but something like this that probably makes 110 horsepower or something, it's really not going to affect it. We'll go around and grab the time card again and let some heat out of the car, because did I mention it's really hot? 16.3, here we come. Into fourth. Come on. 16.3, come on. Wow, that's so slow. It's definitely not getting slower. Well, I can't even guarantee that. Oh mate, drove through the water with no burnout. Bold strategy. Got me. Who would have thought? That was a much better run, that run. It felt quicker overall, but this thing just is not a quick car, so I think we'll pretty much call it done after this pass. We'll grab our timesheet and I think we might even head home, because it's just not going to go any faster. It's super hot. We could just keep hot lapping it all night, but doing stuff like that is generally when you're going to break something. So we'll just cruise it back and grab my time slip. And if it's anything with a 16, I'll just chuck it on the trailer and call it done and go home. The car went pretty well for what it is. Best of 16.7. We actually did 2 or 3 16.7, so that's kind of just what it's going to run. As already mentioned, we do have a Supercharger kit to go on, so keep following the IS200 series for that. We're back onto other projects next week though, so thanks for watching and we'll see you next time.